It took part in many naval engagements of the Revolutionary War, and for a time served as flagship for John Paul Jones after the loss of the Bonhomme Richard. It was considered the fastest vessel of that time. In the mid-1800s, the most prominent shipbuilder here was Simon Mackay, brother of Donald Mackay of clipper ship fame. His yard here at the junction of the rivers was busy from 1842 to 63, when he moved to Boston. In later years, Kenistons, Morrells, Fowlers, and Bagleys were prominent. And in 1874, Cyrus Burnham built the largest vessel since the demise of the Simon Mackay yard, the Edith L. Steer, made for Mark Steer, agent of the mills, and named for his daughter. One vessel not made on the it has been estimated that at the height of the shipbuilding business, out of a population of about 4,500 in Amesbury and Salisbury combined, there were some 2,000 ship workers. The Kenistons, working near the foot of Rocky Hill Road, were the last of the old-time shipbuilders. With the passing in the later 1800s of the building of larger ships, some firms still carried on with the small coasters, but many turned to making small boats. Notable among the latter was the Lowell firm, founded in 1793 by Simeon Lowell and continued by 7 generations of his descendants until within our memory. Then by the Odells, and now as a working museum, still producing the famous bank stories and training craftsmen who will perpetuate the art. Is that all right? Okay.
Your arms log on mine.
Great. Thank you.
That's a good time.
That's better.
Ooh, it's warm in here. No. Jim, let me know when you're... Okay, let everyone get settled.
You might tell them that as long as a lot of them didn't hear it, we're going to repeat.
I think everyone here knows that. Tell me when you're ready, Jim. Give me a... We're delighted to welcome you back here to the 8th in a series of history lessons that Margaret Wrights, our local beloved historian, has been willing to give to the town free for her love of the history of Amesbury. You have to understand that we were out at Alliance Park. I have to tell you this. We were out at Alliance Park and started this introduction and started Margaret's speech, and unfortunately the sounds and the noise at Amesbury were too great. No one could hear what she was saying that were present, so we've begun again. Amesbury owes Margaret a great deal of gratitude. I have to tell you this. She approached me at a charrette and said that her love for Amesbury had to be put into some kind of solid action. And what she wanted to give to the citizens of Amesbury is a free course in the history that she knows and loves dearly, I know. I think from just the presence of the number of people that are here, the courses have been overwhelming in the attendance. I know everyone here, Margaret, is so appreciative of what you do for Amesbury. There's a great sentiment of love in our hearts for you and for the history that you provide for us. And As a person, I'd like to thank you for that, but I'm sure everyone else here would too, if they had that opportunity, and they may probably do it now.
Thank you very much.
This is the 8th in the series, but believe it or not, Margaret Rice is going to be around for a long time doing this, and anyone that has an opportunity to call her, she's always willing to talk to people about history. This is going to be a video series that will be present in the library as a living history, part of a series that we're trying very hard to get together for Amesbury. And one of the things that Margaret had talked about early on in the discussion was the fact that she presents her focus on Amesbury's history, but there are a lot of other people out there that have something to impart as well. The French-Canadian section that came into town and immigrated to this burg because of the factories that were here and that worked so diligently, and many of them, the Bailey Company, the Merrimack Hat Factory, that side of the history has not been presented yet. And if people are willing to come forward and present that, it only lends to us a sense of where Amesbury has been, where we are now from that history. And I'd implore that anyone that has that particular part of the history should come forward and introduce it to us. But right now I introduce Margaret Rice, our beloved historian.
Thank you, Sally. I'm sure a lot of this you will have heard before, but some of you didn't hear it, so. The high point of the shipbuilding in Amesbury did not come until the beginning of the 1700s, when Salisbury Point was first settled. The first builders on the Merrimack were Adamses, Stockmans, and Stevenses. The point was first known as Stevens Point. The Stevens family were large landowners, and the old Stevens homestead, now long gone, was built in 1680. Until well into the 1800s, the Stevenses were among the foremost builders, making small ships about where 478 Main Street is today. I'm not just sure what number is 478. Does anybody here know? Where would 478 be? Whose? Oh. Uh-huh.
Margaret, 484 is where Main Street and Evans Place divide, so it would be 2 houses back this way.
Okay. Here, between 1700 and 1750, Websters, Lowells, Hackett's, Fowlers, and Merrills all carried on shipbuilding, and the river shore was lined with yards. So crowded were they, the lumber often overflowed into the roadway to block the horse-drawn traffic. Below Salisbury Point, on the shore of Poorhouse Cove, so called because of the early location of the Salisbury Almshouse, the Merrill family, including Orlando Merrill of later shipbuilding firm in Newburyport, built for many years. Here, too, began the career of the Manson brothers, George and Eben, whose firm evolved into that now on Bridge Road in Salisbury. The most famous of the shipbuilders were the Hacketts. Well before the Revolution, they were building at their yard near the mouth of the Powwow, hiring carpenters, shipsmiths, and caulkers, whose names, Evans, Hunt, Wingate, Mingo, Huntington, Clough, Wardley, are all familiar in our area today. Tom Mingo's was the first black family recorded in Salisbury, and Mingo Lane on Salisbury Plains is called by their name. Many fine ships were built in the Hackett Yard, including the Alliance, for whom this park is named. In 1776 to 78, William Hackett of the fourth generation, with his cousin John Hackett, supervised the building of the ship, often claimed to be the first frigate of the United States Navy. This is an error that should be corrected. It was undoubtedly one of the first, but not the first. It was named for the Revolutionary Alliance with France, and 3 times carried General Lafayette across the ocean. It took part in many naval engagements of the Revolutionary War, and for a time served as flagship for John Paul Jones after the loss of the Bon Homme Richard. It was considered the fastest vessel of its time. Can you all hear me now? Even way back? Good. In the mid-1800s, the most prominent shipbuilder here was Simon Mackay, brother of Donald Mackay of clipper ship fame. His yard was at the junction of the Powwow and the Merrimack and was busy from 1842 to 1863, when he moved to Boston. In later years, Kenistons, Morrows, Fowlers, and Bagleys were prominent. And in 1874, Cyrus Burnham built the largest vessel since the demise of the Simon Mackay yard, the Edith L. Steer, made for Mark Steer, agent of the mills, and named for his daughter. While the Point was the foremost place of shipbuilding, a number of prominent firms were also working on the Powwow. In 1762, Richard Currier of the 5th generation from the immigrant settler was granted permission to build vessels at the Powwow Landing. I think perhaps some of this will be repetitious. I may have told you this in an earlier session. His yard is now, his yard was on the flats below Upper Main Street and ran from what is now Nason's Court to Currier Street, which led down to the Currier Yard. 5 of Richard Currier's sons became shipwrights. The oldest one, David, while buying ship timber in Salem, New Hampshire, met Polly Rowell, whom he later married. The vessel made with this timber was named for David's wife and called the Polly, the famous privateer of the War of 1812, and later a coaster in active service until 1927. In 1904, on the 100th anniversary of her launching, in 1804, the old schooner was brought back to her birthplace and moored in the Merrimack River to help celebrate Old Home Week in Amesbury. Several score of visitors were guests at a nautical tea aboard the ship with the Daughters of the Revolution as hostesses. Of the five Currier brothers, David, Richard, and Enoch, built the 3 Currier houses still standing side by side on Main Street between the Methodist and Episcopal churches. Another fine shipyard on the Powwow was that of Ensign Jonathan Morrow, who built the Decatur, an 18-gun brig, one of the most successful letters of marque ever fitted out against the enemy in the War of 1812. It has been estimated that at the height of the shipbuilding business, out of a population of about 4,500 in Amesbury and Salisbury combined, there were some 2,000 ship workers. The Kenistons, working near the foot of Rocky Hill Road, were the last of the old-time shipbuilders. With the passing in the later 1800s of the building of larger ships, many firms still carried on with the small coasters, but some turned to making smaller boats. Notable among the latter was the Lowell firm, founded in 1793 by Simeon Lowell and continued by 7 generations of his descendants until within our memory, then by the Odells and now as a working museum, still producing the famous bank stories and training craftsmen who will perpetuate the craft. Though shipbuilding as such is a vanished industry here, it lingers in memory. The thudding of wooden markets on thale pins and the sea chanties of the workers still echo along these shores, and the shadow of the wooden stocks is long in Amesbury. And I'd like to read you something that I wrote when I wrote the history of Salisbury. This may not seem much like history, but to me it's what makes history come alive. A news clipping of uncertain date or source says, "They were such men as are found among pioneers." The masters were often local men, retired sea captains or master carpenters, but the laborers were large, bearded men, many from the forests of New Hampshire and Maine, oftentimes illiterate, but they knew their trade. They knew how to hew to a line. The different parts of a ship were carried up a slanting stage to be fastened together. The plankers would take hot planks out of the steam box and carry them on their shoulders to the place where they were needed. Sometimes great flakes of loose skin were stripped from their backs and shoulders where they had been scalded. It took strong, rugged men to do that kind of work. Another old narrator of the 1890s claimed that it was probable that never again would such a body of men be brought together. From dawn to dusk, on weekends they hewed and sawed, hammered and caulked, and on Sundays they would gather under the bilge of some vessel resting on the stocks, under the sunny side in winter and the shady side in summer, and spin yarns, sailor fashion. Some had been on long trading voyages, others on fishing trips to the banks, and still others on whaling expeditions. They told thrilling tales of their adventures on long, monotonous voyages where men would grow to hate each other's company, and it needed but a look to cause a fight. Sometimes they would sing, and how they could sing. It takes outdoor life and the sea to deepen men's voices. One would lead a chanty and the others would follow with the chorus. Other times the song would be an old gospel hymn or a ballad from their youth. Such men and such voices exist no more, for the square rigger is a thing of the past, and shipbuilding is a vanished industry. But in memory, I can still hear the sound of the axe and adze, the ring of the mallets and beetles, and the clink of the caulking irons as they worked on the vessels. Shipbuilding, as practiced here before and during the 1800s, has been called a folk enterprise. That is, it was an occupation closely akin to the everyday life and character of those who worked at it. Something of the sturdy and fine qualities of their builders seemed to enter into those early vessels. The making of a ship was considered a sort of a creation, and to those early Yankees, their boats were endowed with almost human personalities and traits. This feeling was most clearly expressed in the name and the figurehead of the ship, both of which symbolized what the vessel stood for. The ships built for war were endowed with martial names, but the name Nightingale, nickname of the then popular singer Jenny Lind, was given to a beautiful and well-mannered ship. The Quaker Maid was a sturdy and practical ship. Other names were equally appropriate. The launching was a great occasion, for the ship would be trimmed with flags and bunting. A brass band would play, and the shipyard would be crowded with spectators. The launching would always take place at the noon hour, when the moon was full and the tides at the highest. The men who had worked in the creation of a ship were served a huge dinner in the building where the molds for the ship had been made, and the day was memorable for all concerned. The Salisbury ships were all launched bare, as the saying was, and taken to Newburyport for rigging. Shipbuilding was a time of real prosperity in Amesbury and Salisbury. Wages for that time were high and prices were low, and a dollar was 100 cents. It was, however, a time of danger, too. The work in the yards, as we have noted, was hard, and many a man was broken physically. Tragedies were common, and not only in the yards, but among those who sailed the vessels. At many a launching, one or more men would be killed by flying wedges or timbers, and many ships sailed, never to be heard from again. So I think that more or less covers what we want to know about the shipbuilding here in Amesbury and Salisbury. And it certainly was a period of, as we've mentioned, a period of great prosperity and a period of great forward action in our industry. And it's a period that certainly Amesbury can be very proud of. And thank you. You've been an awfully good audience, and I'm so glad you've stuck with me. And I'll turn it over now to Betty. She's going to show us one thing I do want to tell you. The Cablevision company has offered to make up all of the tapes on these lessons, this history course, and they will be broadcasting the entire thing again in July, every Tuesday night at an earlier hour than those that have been broadcast in the past few weeks. So perhaps you'll want to look at it at that time too. Sometimes I think the broadcasts are better than the actual lessons. And does anyone have any questions on this particular section of the, yes?
Those 3 houses you say were built next to each other between the two churches,
Mm-hmm.
that would be where Dr. Mullen used to be
Yes.
years ago, right in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of them is now the Methodist parsonage, not the parsonage, but their vestry, whatever they. Mm-hmm. What is it?
The minister lives there,
Yeah. And I think one is an office building, and the other apparently has apartments in it. So, but they're nice. They are really nice old houses. All right, Betty, are you ready?
Before you start, though, Betty wants to say something to you, Jim.
How about when I swap trays? You ready? Okay. I'm Betty Goodwin, and I'm going to show you some slides tonight. Most of the slides will be depicting what Margaret has already told you about, and I'm starting with Chain Bridge coming into Amesbury. And this is the sign entering Amesbury, and we're going to go over the Essex-Merrimack Bridge. And this is the Harriet Prescott Spofford house. Harriet was an author. She was a friend of Whittier's. That is on Deer Island. And this picture was taken from Deer Island. It is a little bit conflicting because it's both bridges. It's the John Greenleaf Whittier Bridge and also the Essex-Merrimack Bridge. And that's the John Greenleaf Whittier Bridge. If you would like me to stop at any slides, why just feel free to do so, and I'll do it. This is supposed to be the house that Robert Frost stayed in. This was my mother's family home. It was the Hoyt homestead. And my mother was living there at the time that Robert Frost was supposed to have visited there, and she doesn't remember it, but it was a two-family house, and he did stay in the other half, and she was a young child, so maybe he just stayed there for a short period of time. This is the Lowell Boat Shop. And these are some of the dories that were made at the Lowell Boat Shop. And this is the Salisbury Point Cemetery up on Clark's Road. All of my mother's ancestors were buried there, the Hoyt family. This is also the Salisbury Point Cemetery. Then this is what was the Christian church, and then it was later the Grace Baptist Church, and now it is a family home. This is the Michael Walsh house, and this Michael Walsh was a professor, and he ran a boys' school there, and he also wrote a history book on arithmetic, a book on arithmetic that was used extensively throughout the United States. That's on Main Street, about kitty corner across from the Christian church. Mary Ann Norman lived there at one time. And this is the former Biddle home, and the Muros own it now, and they have recently had it painted, so it looks quite a bit different. This is how it looks from the back side after it has been painted. And this is the Powwow River in back of the Muros house. If you walk up over the hill, the Powwow River runs in back there. This is Alliance Park. And that's the stone. And this was the new plaque that was dedicated last year, denoting some of the shipbuilders. People kid me and say that I never get any pictures of sunrises. I just take sunsets. I'm not a person that likes to get up in the morning, but at least once a year I get up and go to the sunrise service over in Alliance Park on Easter morning. So I took this picture. And this is also Easter morning. And this is a picture of the Union Congregational Church, which we are in now. And the part that most of you are sitting in now used to be just a shed for the horses to be in. The parish hall was this rear part, and then they extended that to be the whole part that we are sitting in now. And some people from Sandy Hill and Rocky Hill became very dissatisfied with their churches and decided to get together, and they started this Union Congregational Church. In 1918, there was a bad fire from one of the cold logs that was across the street here, and the whole fire department was down here. They had horse-drawn vehicles at the time. And the parsonage, which is about 3 houses down, also got on fire, and the firefighters couldn't get by. They had to go back uptown because there wasn't a bridge across the Macy Street at the time, and go down Rocky Hill Road to fight the fire, and they did save the parsonage, which I don't see how they did, but... This was during the bicentennial. We all dressed up and came to church one Sunday. That was the Reverend Earl Young on the left with his wife Charlotte. And next to her is Esther Burke. I don't know if any of you know her. And then Irene Wilson and Frances Brown and myself and my sister. This picture was given to me by Bill Gray. I don't know if any of you remember Bill Gray. He was a great photographer, and he took that picture and gave it to me. This was Larry's Marina. This is the Powwow River Bridge. And these were some pilings from the bridge. And this is the Powwow River Bridge taken from the river. And this is Merrimack Street, and this is the boulder that marks the spot where Washington was supposed to have crossed there. It's about opposite the sewage treatment plant. And that's the Merrimack hat. And this was my father's family home. It's on the corner of Beacon Street. My father's name was Goodwin, and there's Goodwin's Creek along there, so I'm sure that it was some of his ancestors. And he used to talk about his family taking boarders from the hat shop. They were Polish boarders. He always remembers that they were drunk all weekend. That was the only thing he remembered about them. This was a gas explosion. I don't know how many of you remember it, on the corner of Cleveland Street. The Kiesels lived there. Wasn't that terrible? This is the Mary Baker Eddy house. Mary Baker Eddy came, that was the Squire Bagley house, and she came there to visit Squire Bagley's daughter, Sarah. And she was only supposed to stay a short period of time, and I guess she stayed a couple of years. This is the stone that is where Josiah Bartlett's home was. And he lived there until he was about 12 years old, and then he moved up Lion's Mouth Road. This is the Theophilus Foote house, and this is on the corner of Bartlett Place, where Josiah Bartlett's home was. And this is the second oldest house in town. Oh, the third oldest house. Margaret, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these things. Uh-huh. And this is the Bartlett Museum. No matter how many pictures I take of this, I never get a good one. It's so shady. This used to be the former Bartlett School. And this is the Macy Colby house, and this is the oldest house in town. And this is one of the rooms in the Macy Colby house. And I think I'm correct in saying that that's the communion table that used to be at the Sandy Hill Meeting House. This is another room in the Macy Colby house. And this is going up 110 now, up the Haver Road. And this is in the Union Cemetery, and this rock shows where the first meeting house in Amesbury was. And then this is the Union Cemetery. And this is in the Union Cemetery. I think these birches are so pretty. Then this is going up to Martin Road, and on the corner of Martin Road was the second meeting house. And this is the site of Susanna Martin's home. Susanna Martin was supposed to be a witch, but most people don't think she really was a witch. And then we're coming back down, and this is where Sandy Hill Meeting House was. They took some of the lumber from that second meeting house on Martin Road and built a new meeting house, and that is the junction of Highland and 110, that little plot of land there. And this is Golgotha. This is down on Macy Street, and this is where some of the first settlers of Amesbury were buried. The first name on the second row is John Hoyt. That was an ancestor of mine. And then we're going up Main Street, and this is the Captain's Well. And this is the Currier Tavern. Valentine Bagley married the Currier girl, daughter. And this is the Captain's Well. And this is the poem that Whittier wrote. Valentine Bagley was shipwrecked, and he vowed that if he ever got back to Amesbury, he'd dig a well so that none of the passers-by would suffer the same as he did. And that's the rest of the poem. And this is the high school fire. And that's the Doughboy. That was dedicated in 1929. And that's a picture of the middle school. After the fire, they built a new high school up on Highland Street. And this is a picture of the old high school, and then it later became the junior high school. I went there for the 7th and 8th grade. It's on the back lawn of the Maplewood Manor. And then this is at the foot of the hill where that school was, and it's in honor of all those who served Korea, World War II, and Vietnam. And then this is the Christian Science Church, former Christian Science Church, and it is now the home of Jim and Allison Kelly. It's on the corner of Carpenter Street on Main Street. And this is our beautiful new post office. On the site of this post office used to be the Bleaky Mills that Margaret talked to you about, and it was struck by lightning one day and destroyed it. And in back of the post office is what was the brickyard. And these are some flowers at the post office. And this is the marker at Patton's Pond. And this is a postcard of the old Patton's Pond. There used to be factories along the shore. And this is also the Patton's Pond. And this is Patton's house, Hawley's house. And this was made from bricks from the brickyard. And then this was the house of William Biddle up on the top of Patton's Hill. I never can remember if it was the Legion home or the KSE Hall. The American Legion. Mm-hmm. And then this was the former Universalist Church, and now it is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now we're going up to the Highlands, and this wasn't a very good picture of the hospital. This was the Amesbury Hospital. And this is Rogers Funeral Home. And this was Dr. Hines' home, and now is owned by another doctor. And then this is going back down Spahawk Street. This was during the bicentennial, and they had a parade, and this was where they all gathered. And that's the St. Joseph Church and Josiah Bartlett's statue. And this is called the Huntington Park. This is the library. And this is the Main Street Church. And that's the steeple of the Main Street Church. Bill Gray also gave me those two pictures. That is the Methodist Church. And then this is one of the Currier houses, and the Currier shipyard was down in back there. The Powell River runs down in back there, and that's where the privateer Polly was built. And this was hard to take, the Episcopal Church. And this is the old post office. And this was the fire over the White Lunch. And this is down Mill Street. This is one of the old mill buildings on the Powell River. And then this is going down into the square. And up over Boyle's drugstore was the counting house and the financial offices of all the mills up in the mill yard. And also the Powell River Bank and the Provident Bank did their business up over there too. And that's a sign saying the counting house. And that was the doorway to go upstairs. And this is the mill yard with the bleachers, and that's the Whittier Press in back there. And this is the falls up in the mill yard. And this is the mill yard with some of the old mill buildings. That's Buswell's. Can you imagine the force of that water going right under that building? Hardly looks like it's sitting on that corner post there. That's the mill yard. That's also the mill yard. This is the square. Now we're going over Elm Street, and this is the Elm Street Fire Station. And that's the Connor Cemetery. And a lot of men from the Revolutionary War were buried there. And then this is Carriage Hill in back of that cemetery. And that's the new plaque that was dedicated last fall to all the carriage makers. Pardon? It's on this building here, the Biddle and Smart. Actually, it's a new part of that building. That's the old Biddle and Smart offices. This was the Horseman School. And then I don't know if any of you know the story of Reuben Smith. He was buried in his rocking chair. He always said that he wanted to be buried sitting up, and I think that he lived up over Brochu's Market, and he was carried downstairs in his rocking chair and buried here. This is in the Mount Prospect Cemetery. This is a view of Amesbury from the Mount Prospect Cemetery. And this is the sign going up to Powder House Hill. This is off of Madison Street. And this is the Powder House. And they stored ammunition here. I've heard it rumored, but I don't know if it's just a rumor, that there may have been a tunnel that went from there to the training field, but I'm not sure if that's true or not. And this is the training field. It's over on Monroe Street and Portsmouth Road. And that was the sign that was put up during either the bicentennial or the tricentenary. And this was a flag-raising ceremony we had one day during either one of those celebrations. The fellow taking the picture and all three of the boys raising the flag were Costello boys. And this is the Morrill House on Portsmouth Road, and this is the third oldest house, I think, in Amesbury. This is the Rocky Hill Meeting House. And this is the interior of the Rocky Hill Meeting House. This picture is very deceiving. I took it from the balcony, and the organ is in the balcony, but right in back of the organ is the pulpit. The pulpit is a great big high pulpit. If none of you have ever been in there, you should go in. It's really quite a sight to see. And they're all box pews. And this is the Seventh-day Adventist school. And this is the Salisbury Plains burying ground. This is over on Monroe Street. And these were some of the graves in that cemetery. And they're coming back into town now and going up Margaret Street, and this is the Baptist Church. And this is Cook's Farm up on Southampton Road, actually Fern Avenue, I guess. This is the elementary school. And this is the Whittier School, or it was also called the Prospect School. It's on Prospect Street. This was the former Salisbury High School because at one point this part of Amesbury was Salisbury. And then at one time Amesbury High was overcrowded and they used it. Then after they got through using it as a schoolhouse, the YMCA in Amesbury used it, and now it's just going to rack and ruin. It's a shame. And then this is from Poe Hill, and I never got such a shock in my life as I did when I went up top there. It used to be such a beautiful spot, and now it's being developed, I guess. It's all dug up and gravel pits and everything else. And then we're coming back into town, and this is the town hall, and the police station, and the fire station, and the town hall annex. That used to be the fire station. And then this was the Ordway School. And now it is the senior center. This is Sacred Heart Church. Now we're going to the Whittier home. And this is the back of the Whittier home. And this is the summer kitchen in the backyard of the Whittier home. And this is the parlor and Whittier's picture. That's Whittier's picture. A couple of weeks ago, some of us women from the Whittier home went to Concord, Mass, and went to Wayside, which is a place where the Alcotts used to live, and also Hawthorne. And on the wall was a picture of Whittier with children, and nobody knows of any other copy of this picture around. The children are supposed to be one of the publishers he used, children, the Lothrop children. And this is the garden room in the Whittier home, and this is supposed to be where Whittier wrote Snowbound. One day at the Whittier home meeting, we had the Cochrans bring their horse and gave the ladies a ride around the block, which was a lot of fun. And then this is Whittier's grave. This is Lake Gardner. And this is the Friends Meeting House. And this is the park pond in back of the Friends Meeting House. This is the park pond. This is the Davis School. It's across from the park. It is now a private home. Holly's wife, Mary, used to teach there. And this is the new playground. And the tennis court. And this was when they had one of the carriage shows at the park. Okay. This is some more of the carriage show. I love this picture. All I can think of is Little House on the Prairie. That was a carriage that belongs to the Rogers. This is the high school and the Cashman School. And I took this picture just because the flowers were so pretty. It was Dr. Traster's house at the time. It has been sold since then. And this is the house of Currier and Ives. Currier lived here summers. He was a cousin to Mrs. Woodsum, the old Mrs. Woodsum. About Kitty Connor across from Margaret. And there's Margaret herself. And Margaret used to rent some of her rooms to a fellow that raised dahlias. And these dahlias are in her backyard. This is Margaret's barn, and the barn where the Carriage Museum stores their carriages. This is one of the surreys that we own. This used to be the Philip Jones house, and Philip Jones used to court Elizabeth Whittier, Whittier's sister. Then it was the Snow house, and now Connie Aponis, who was a Snow girl, lives there. And this was the piggery at Woodsum's. And these are Canadian geese at the little pond at Woodsum's. And the cows, I always love to see those cows going for a wade in the pond there. And that's the lion, at Lion's Mouth. And that's Woodsum's farm. And this was a culmination of the horse show. They had a parade that went up to the Woodsum's and back. And this was one of the festival days. Are you in that one, Jim? Yeah. And this was a sleigh competition that they had at Woodsum's one year. And this is Lucia's farm just beyond the Woodsum farm. I used to run a kindergarten in Amesbury, and I always used to take my children up there because they had so many things. That poor parrot had a broken wing, so he couldn't go anywhere. And the sheep were at loose ears. And they had this llama there. And one day when I happened to be going by, I don't know why I had my camera with me, but the llama had gotten loose. He decided he was going for a walk. So he came running down the hill and started up the street. And then this used to be the town farm, and it is now the home of Ethel Woodson. And then this clump of trees here is where Josiah Bartlett's home was. And this was the area that Margaret kept telling you about that was called the Great Swamp. And this was where the Indians were supposed to be and where Bad Simon held out. And this is the same area during one of the floods that we had in Amesbury. And then this was last spring. We almost have another lake in town sometimes during the spring. That's Whitehall Road in the background. These lady slippers are in the back of Esther Headley's house. They were so pretty. And this is Tuxbury's Pond. This was during one of the canoe races. Some of the people try to be funny and go right over the falls, but they don't seem to make much headway because they usually capsize. And this is the Powwow River right below the falls there. And this is the Amesbury Town Forest. And this is the entrance to the town forest. And this is very hard to see, but it's an old, old cemetery. Some people say it's people that had smallpox were buried there, but I don't really know. And then we are going to what used to be Kimball's Pond and was later named to change the name to Lake Attitash. And I've read Attitash is the Indian word for blueberry, and I've also read that it's the Indian name for huckleberry, so I'm not quite sure, but I would rather think it was blueberries because there are so many blueberries there. And this was a community pump. When my family first used to go to Lake Attitash, that's the only water they had. The town water wasn't at Lake Attitash. And this was a picture of Lake Attitash that I took this spring. I live at Lake Attitash, by the way. So if I sound a little bit prejudiced during these pictures, why? That's our lowly little rowboat. This past year, we have been having a terrible time at Lake Attitash with weeds, and we got a grant to have a weed harvester come in, and this big machine went up and down the lake. They didn't get the weeds up by the roots, but cut them off, and then they would fill up the back of that thing, and they would take it and dump it in a truck, and it was taken to a farm in Amesbury. So it's going to remain to be seen whether it has done any good or not. I threw this one in just because I liked the picture. This was during the tercentenary. That's my mother and my two sisters and my niece and another sister and myself. We were getting ready to go to church. Everybody dressed up during the festivities. And this was a northern pike that was caught in Lake Attitash. I meant to look up the length and the weight of that fish, but I didn't. this man was renting the cottage next to us. These 4 swans appeared one fall, and they stayed until the water froze. Somebody told me because they had some of the brown on them that they were young ones, and they got frozen in the ice. And somebody from Merrimack saw their plight and went out with his rowboat and took his oars and tried to break up the ice, and some of the people on shore saw him and thought he was having trouble and called the fire department. And so I don't know what ever happened to the poor porgies. I mean swan. And this is what we call Back River at Lake Attitash. It's up at the end of the lake, and it's such a peaceful, pretty spot. We take our rowboat and go up there. And this is to prove that there are blueberries up there. And that's the fall at Lake Attitash. And then this is the winter. These ice boats are called DNs. It stands for Detroit News. It's a class of ice boat, and people register them. My brother has one. My brother-in-law had one. My brother-in-law's father had one. Leonard Lee Atherton is probably there. He had one. And Don Kent always brought his down, and they used to have races. That's Jeff Olkers with the yellow jacket. And that ice boat belongs to Clayton Hammond at the lake. And this was an ice boat that belonged to my brother and my brother-in-law. It used to belong to Lester Jackson, and he gave it to them. And we had more fun with that ice boat. It held about 5 people, and that really would go. And that's a picture from our front yard. And then I just threw in a few sunsets at the lake to end up with.